to take responsibility for this. And when I say take responsibility, in our business, it's oftentimes difficult to draw a direct correlation between who is responsible for, what activism is responsible for what outcome. But I think in this case, you can take direct credit for the fact that the Department of Justice has announced a grand jury investigation into Roy Singham. Roy Singham. 1 year ago, the name Roy Singham, no one knew. You could say Roy Singham. No one knew who that was. Peter Schweizer told me a story about, he was the first to report on Roy Singham. And he told me a story once about the cover of his book that showed these different billionaires who control the left with their money, with their funding. And people would always point out, like, sure, they knew George Soros. They knew, these other different people. And they'd always point to the picture of Roy Singham. And they'd be like, but who's that? You are directly responsible for bringing the name Roy Singham into the public consciousness of the United States. And I'm not just talking about your friends and your family and the people you go to church with. I am talking about the United States government. By relentlessly highlighting that Roy Singham's money funds left-wing violence in our country and demonstrating how his money comes through this umbrella group of, innocuously named political activism groups and 501c3s, you demonstrated how that money coming from Roy Singham, who's probably controlled by the CCP, is paying for the destruction in the streets of the United States of America. And I want to say how incredibly proud I am of you for doing this. It's not an easy thing politicians sometimes pay untold amounts of money to actually, get the media exposure to cause their name recognition to go up. You single-handedly caused the name recognition of Roy Singham to be essentially kitchen table information in the United States of America. That is no easy feat, and I'm incredibly proud of you. But I want to talk about what this grand jury investigation into Roy Singham actually entails, because it's interesting to look at how the Department of Justice is trying to go after Roy Singham. To discuss this with me is Seamus Bruner. He is the author of Control Oligarchs, Exposing the Billionaire Class, Their Secret Deals, and the Globalist Plot to Dominate Your Life. He's also the Executive Director and VP for Research at the Government Accountability Institute. Seamus, good to see you.
Hey, Liz, great to see you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. It's been a while. But you have been reporting on Roy Singham, and specifically not just on like what he does. We often talk about on the show what he does. His money, controlled by the CCP. He sends his money to all these, groups, and these umbrella groups that then fund essentially Antifa in our streets. But you have been reporting for a long time on the specifics of how the Department of Justice is now investigating Roy Singham through this donor-advised fund. It's kind of nerdy, but I really think I want to understand exactly what the Department of Justice is doing. I know everyone with us today does as well. So can you explain to us the sort of the nitty-gritty of what this investigation is and where the law breaking happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So Neville Roy Singham lives in Shanghai. He's an American billionaire, but he lives in Shanghai. He shares office complex with several CCP entities. So he's very close with China. He's a Marxist, and that he's sent nearly $300 million from Shanghai into an assortment of left-wing groups, many of them controlled by him or his wife. Jody Evans is on the board. She's the head of Code Pink, which is one of these radical riot protest organizations. And so $300 million, a huge chunk of it went through this Goldman Sachs donor-advised fund, this philanthropy advisor. Over 100 million actually passed through Goldman Sachs. And so with Goldman as a middleman, it kind of legitimizes the money. And so in money laundering, some of what these charges are about, there's three phases really. And there's placement, where you put the money into the system, whether in China or in an American bank or another bank. And then there's the integration layer. And then there's the layering layer. So it's placement, layering, integration. Goldman serves as kind of the layering part of that process, where you mix in the bad money with the good money. And so when it goes into kind of this Goldman Sachs black box, it gets mixed in with good people's money, bad people's money, and it comes out integrated in the financial system. So that's kind of how money laundering works. This is why Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent flew to New York and met with the head of Goldman, David Solomon, and said, if you guys had anything to do with this, if we find that you're kind of in on this integration, that's going to be a big problem. Now, David Solomon of Goldman Sachs says that they had nothing to do with it. They're going to be fully cooperative in the Neville Roy Singham grand jury probe. So we'll see about that. But I think that this has a lot to do sort of with the SPLC and case, which is kind of odd. But you look at what the DOJ is focusing on, which is this dark money NGO stuff. The Neville Roy Singham money is a foreign component, but you have, SPLC, you've got all of these left-wing donors, whether it's Soros, the Arabella funding network, the Tides funding network. They're pouring all of this money into what we've called Riot Incorporated, the protest industrial complex. I mean, SPLC was actually paying the crazy neo-Nazis and KKK members themselves. And so I think these cases are not, they're not actually officially linked, but I think this is sort of part of the same process of getting to the bottom of it, following the money, and seeing what roles these big money donors play.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting analogy. So my understanding, I mean, these types of white collar investigations are so complicated. But my understanding is that it's not a crime to have some anonymity in donor advised funds. So it's not the fact that Roy Singham didn't put his name directly on it, but that I guess layering is the word that you use, but like it's a 5-step process, right? It's Roy Singham's money. He put that money through shell LLCs to try to disguise that money. It then went to the donor advised fund from those shell LLCs. From the donor advised fund, it went through these pass through, I think they were 501c3s, and then it went on to its final recipients, which would be the like the Riot Incorporated that you described, these operative groups on the ground in the United States. We saw that with the anti-ICE riots. We've seen Roy Singham money basically at every violent protest that's associated with the left. That's going to be Roy Singham money. So they're not charges yet, but the 3 things that are being investigated, to my understanding, would be bank fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. And there has to be, you can correct me if I'm wrong, intent to deceive the bank, or to use a wire fraud deceptively, or to hide the origin of the money and then the destination of the money intentionally for there to be a crime. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I want to back up a little bit to what President Trump put out on Truth Social last year, where he said he wanted George Soros looked at for RICO. I think if it's going to be a really high bar to meet, but if you start with RICO, where this is actually one big corrupt enterprise, Riot Incorporated, and that this is racketeer influence. Now, it's very hard to reach that RICO criminal conspiracy. But when you start with kind of lower charges like bank fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, you can work your way up to, are there more than one person in on this? Are there multiple people planning this whole enterprise? And so now, get to where we are now with both SPLC and with Neville Roy Singham. If you have bank fraud, wire fraud, in the case of SPLC, it's deceiving the donors. In the case of Neville Roy Singham, it's using Goldman as kind of a layering phase in a money laundering racket. You kind of get the people who are involved to either say, they turn on each other and say, I had nothing to do with this, or, yeah, I did have something to do with this. And they plead down, and you can kind of work your way up to, this is one large criminal conspiracy. So I think whether that's the end goal or not, I think that should be the end goal. I know that President Trump wants there to be RICO investigations, but again, those are extremely high bars to meet. And then let's kind of zoom in on where this money actually ends up. You're talking about criminal rioters, people throwing Molotov cocktails, assaulting law enforcement, trying to lay siege to the ICE offices in Newark and in Minneapolis and across the country, Los Angeles. So there's been all this criminal activity. If you've got people funding criminal activity, that's a crime. And so they're going to say, well, we didn't know that it was a crime. But here's the problem with that is they're funding the bail funds too, whether it's Singham or any of the other people in the Tides or Arabella, Soros funding networks. I mean, Kamala Harris herself famously funded some of the bail funds. So it's hard to say that you didn't know that criminal activity was occurring when you're trying to bail these violent criminals out and get them back onto the streets.
Oh man, I hope that you are correct about RICO, because this would be, I mean, you talk about legacy for President Trump. If he was able to take down the entire funding apparatus for the left, which is so despicable, that would be one of the most historically epic things that I can possibly think of for this era of our country. Okay, so when it comes to proving intent, I mean, RICO is obviously a high bar. You're not necessarily going to find like a piece of paper or a voice text admission from Roy Singham that he was intentionally trying to, disguise where the money was coming from, or admitting that he's a CCP asset, or, even talking about the fact that he knows that the ultimate destination of his money is going to people who are knowingly using it to commit violence. You're not necessarily going to find that kind of admission. So when you're analyzing a case like this of, bank fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, I know you don't have to have the things that I mentioned. You don't have to have some kind of verbal or written admission to prove intent. But how difficult of a task does the Department of Justice have to prove that? Or is it evidenced just by this, 5-point pass-through system that he constructed?
Yeah, that's a great question, Liz. It's the thing we come up against time and again. Like, what did Hillary Clinton know? When did she
Yeah.
know it? What was her intent? And so many others, Biden, et cetera. I would say that prosecutors need to use the same framework that they use for insider trading. We've done a lot of work on congressional insider trading, and to prove insider trading cases, in the private sector, prosecutors almost never find the smoking gun email that says, it's our intent to commit insider trading. What they look at is the pattern. And so when you look at the pattern and you lay out what we've laid out over, many years, whether it's with Neville Roy Singham or some of these dark money NGOs, it's time and again, they're funding the exact same groups. They fund the bail funds, they fund the legal groups like the ACLU and the National Lawyers Guild, or some of these groups that work very hard to get these violent criminals.
Those are like the
back
green
onto
hat
the
people at
streets.
Antifa riots, right?
Yes, exactly right.
Okay.
And so when you're funding every phase of the, Riot Inc. pipeline, where it's the legal groups and the PR groups and the boots on the ground, it's kind of hard to make a case, especially after the convictions happen. I mean, we just had the first Antifa convictions down in Texas for domestic terrorism, and yet you still fund the groups that are affiliated with them, and you still roll out these same kind of violent criminals over and over and over again, recently in Newark, and I'm sure there will be another city before the summer's over. I say look at the pattern, and whether they can find a smoking gun email, that'll be up to them. But it's a pretty stark pattern when you look at it.
Yeah, because it's not that I would have an expectation that Roy Singham would cooperate willingly. I mean, he probably doesn't even care if he's held in contempt or, there's subpoenas. He's in China. Like, what are they going to do? China's not going to extradite him back here for a congressional investigation. You used a phrase before that I want to ask you about, though. You said that Roy Singham's money, like essentially it's bad money, right? That the donor advised funds, that's where it funnels. Good money is mixed with bad money and obscures it. So what about Singham's money makes it bad money? Is it that he lives in China, or is that he has an understanding about where it's going? Like, what is it that would, at that point, make the distinction of it being bad money? And the reason that I ask is just because my understanding is that it's not a crime to mask your identity when donating. Like, you can have a donor advised fund. You can donate to it anonymously. You can even use a shell LLC as long as there's not an intent to defraud. So what makes Singham's money bad money?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say that it's criminal money. And I didn't say that. But
Oh, okay. Okay.
we'll like going back to where he got the money. I mean, he was a tech guy. He sold his company ThoughtWorks for close to $1 billion, almost $800 million, close to $1 billion. That's all legitimate. So there's nothing criminal about like where he got his money from. The real problem with it, why it's bad money, and I wouldn't say criminal per se, but bad money, is what he does with the money. And so I think he's a very interesting case because of all of the things he does, especially his Cuba connection, the ties that he has with Cuban intelligence and these groups that he brings down to Cuba. This is kind of one of the angles that I know that congressional investigators are looking into, the State Department is looking into, where he brings these groups, whether it's BLM, one of the groups was famously the Armed Queers of Salt Lake City, which is this kind of Marxist transgender ideology group that, of course, it's not illegal for them to be training at the gun range. So, it's not criminal. And I will say it's a double-edged sword here. I mean, donor advised funds, the right wing uses them. Like, we believe in free speech and being able to spend your money anonymously and privately. So, if the wrong administration gets in and starts criminalizing all money spending, I mean, we'd have a problem with that. But it's really what he does with this money. And so bringing groups from America down to Cuba to give them Marxist revolutionary training, that's a huge problem. Or funding pro-Hamas groups in New York City to commit all sorts of mayhem, or anti-ICE groups out in Los Angeles to set Waymo cars on fire. Whether, his money didn't specifically in a line item pay for, light the Waymos on fire, but it created the conditions under which in Newark and all Minneapolis, all of these other groups commit their lawlessness. And so it's going to be, it's going to be a question whether you can actually link all of this violence to him. But I would say the pattern of all of the bad stuff that occurs at a Singham funded event is
Yeah.
worthy of examination, and we'll see what the grand jury finds.
Yeah, and that actually makes sense to me because in a sense I hope it's not the anonymity of the donation for the exact reason that you articulated. I hope the Department of Justice is focusing more on what the money was intended for, or perhaps, I mean, I don't know if there's a FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act aspect to this investigation. To my knowledge, there's not, although I think there probably should be, because I think the pattern of Roy Singham's behavior indicates pretty obviously that he is influenced at the very least by the CCP. I mean, you're not allowed to invest in China unless you have explicit permission from the CCP. So he doesn't have to be getting a check directly from them to be paid off by them for his behavior. That's essentially implicitly paying him off. So I think that's right. If you use your money to sow discord in the United States, or that you're sending millions of dollars sort of with the understanding, explicit or otherwise, that it would be used for violence, that would probably be where this investigation is hinging, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just the structure of it all. I mean, it's not normal, even on the right, where where donors use donor advised funds. Like, you don't have all of these shell corporations and LLCs that go defunct. It's the same thing with the SPLC. It's like they set up all these shell corporations and dummy corporations. That's just odd. That's just money laundering behavior. It's not necessarily a crime, but it's worthy of investigation.
Yeah, and by the way, Goldman Sachs shut down that donor advised fund several years ago because they also agreed that it was shady behavior when it was brought to their attention. So this is not something, oh, Trump now targeting political enemies, blah, blah, blah. Don't even care about that talking point anyway. But this was something that Goldman Sachs themselves recognized as strange behavior. Seamus, thanks for all the reporting that you've done on this. I mean, really, you and Peter were at the forefront of reporting on Roy Singham long before he became a household name in our country, and I really appreciate that about you. Thanks for being on the show. Where can people find you, by the way?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. It's great to see you. I'm at Seamus Bruner. Seamus is SeamusBruner, all platforms. I'm mostly on Twitter.
Okay, well, guys, highly recommend that you follow him. His work is great, as you can plainly see. Thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Liz.